I'm really delighted to be here, and I want to thank my new friends, Andrew, Lee, of course, who is not such a new friend and a treasured one, and the others who have made this wonderful day happen. I've been caught up to date on what some other people have done, and it's been nice to hear all the talks this afternoon. I'm going to do something quite different. I'm going to proceed through a quick hit on each of the major legacy fossil fuels in the United States and look at some problems that they present for policymakers, for economists, and for people who are trying to figure out how a system works in which so many big players are economically interconnected in a kind of nexus in such a way that no matter what you do to one of them, you are almost certain to affect the future of others by restructuring incentives of other players and what is likely to happen as a consequence of that. So I want to begin, and I'll hit each one rather briefly and I'm afraid incompletely. And you're entitled to jump up and ask a question or express a view about it at any time, and that will be fine. So let me begin with coal, because that's the right place to start. It's cheap. It's a great legacy fuel. It has an infrastructure that was paid for partly beginning in the Victorian era of industrial revolution. It is pretty well subsidized in the United States, although there are frequent cries to recall the subsidies. And it is very interesting to those of us who care about climate change because there are two externalities associated with the burning of coal for electric power. One of them is that it has an enormous effect on the probability of future climate events in terms of its liberation of large amounts of greenhouse gases on account of burning it. That's obvious, and I think everybody understands that by now. But unfortunately, as we test the American people's feelings about its own climate future, it turns out that they care a great deal more about things that are happening right away and at very short time intervals, not so much to climate problems, which they foresee as a longer-term structure that can be worried about later. And that's why a group of people who have formerly been associated in part with PESD and Mark Thurber's organization have published a very interesting paper in Foreign Affairs, which says, in effect, let's focus now on a climate policy that we can all agree on, because it focuses on the shorter term events, because some of the major climate forcing agents in terms of being effective greenhouse gases, the big warmers, are all things that have short residence time in the atmosphere. Methane, a matter of a decade or so. Chlorofluorocarbons, which were the subjects of the Montreal Protocol that was attempted to solve the ozone hole problem in the Antarctic. All those are short-acting like soot, black carbon. All those things are prospects for dealing with an environmental problem in a way that gets something you can do done rather quickly and might have an enforcing action on the public's consciousness about climate change. If you can have a success, if you can make a quick difference, then there's a real opportunity to make something of that. The shorter term issue, of course, has way more to do with public health and the way in which we treat the atmosphere in short range than it does with the long-range prospects for climate change. And it's those externalities, that is, the public health externalities, that we have some reasonable chance of doing something about. That is, there are clear possibilities that now the Environmental Protection Agency, in exercising its regulatory mandates under the Clean Air Act and under the Clean Water Act, to deal with the consequences both of coal mining and of coal burning, which puts other pollutants into the air that are handled regularly by the Environmental Protection Agency in the form of NASDAQs, then there is a way of dealing quickly with these kinds of pollutants and creating a strong impression that some progress is being made on the longer range issues. So in fact, because the Senate would not have a hearing on climate change at which it would have been possible, we hope, to have established a price on carbon, there is no price on carbon, therefore no tax and no cap and trade system. So what we have is a policy that is rather strongly enthused about by the Sierra Club and other environmental organizations to attempt to internalize the public health costs by making coal cost more. And of course, we're encouraging, everybody is, I suppose, the Environmental Protection Agency for applying those regulatory mandates despite occasional serious resistance from, certainly from the Senate and from particularly the Republican side of the House. So that's the situation of the status quo with respect to this kind of issue. I think you may be asking yourselves the question, I hope you are, why not natural gas? Why don't we immediately go to a substitute for coal-fired power that is 50% reduction, represents 50% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions in the short range? If we can get the Environmental Protection Agency to do all of its things, why wouldn't we immediately pick the 12 dirtiest coal-fired power plants that we haven't succeeded in blocking? Parenthetically, the Sierra Club and other environmental organizations have been quite determined to prevent, by litigation, the construction of new coal-fired power plants while encouraging the EPA to do its thing. Now, why don't we take advantage of the cleared market space that we have created by blocking new coal-fired power plants and replace those with natural gas? Here's the problem as some people see it, and I'm not going to take a position here, but I certainly invite you to, and that is that some people argue that it's worth waiting for renewable substitutes like solar and wind to fill that market space. On the other hand, they're arguing that at the bus stop, it's better to wait for the bus marked perfection than the bus marked better. And the result is that we have a flourishing disagreement in which I think probably the better argument is on the side of pick some bad ones and do it. But what I would love to see along with that is a provision that said, we think that any such substitution of natural gas for coal ought to be accompanied with a serious effort to include a carbon sequestration and carbon capture and sequestration thing in the new revision. And if that were out there as a kind of incentive for research on CCS, that would be good. Well, I'll stop there by kind of leaving the argument with you. And if you want to jump up with a question or a challenge, I'd love to hear it, because I think this is an interesting problem and it kind of gets me excited. Oh, well, I'll be excited all by myself. and I'm going to turn to... Oh, good. I'm sorry. Please.
Sorry. Well, you mentioned that effective climate policy could be constructed around short-acting pollutants like methane. And one of the big arguments against natural gas is that it emits a lot of methane, which is a very strong greenhouse gas. So would not the public sale of natural gas as a transition sort of fuel, would that not be much more presentable if it's also coupled with policy that says, okay, this is how we're going to also address the methane issue?
Thank you so much, because that's a perfect switch. Yeah, absolutely. Methane is a greenhouse gas. It doesn't last very long in the atmosphere, but it's pretty powerful for while it's there. And so I guess the view is that it has to be included, now that we're talking about methane, as something that we have to pay attention to in terms of its interrelationships with the others and with the economic incentives that must accompany us as we go ahead and deal with climate change. What about methane? You may have forgotten about San Bruno. Anybody from San Bruno? A pipeline burst and it blew up and it killed 6 people and it destroyed a whole neighborhood. That's a tough thing about methane. When it blows up, it's pretty bad. The question of whether pipelines that are carrying methane leak is a lively question, of course, as we consider the politics of the Keystone Pipeline, which will be decided after we decide an election. The whole proposition is keyed strongly around those kinds of hazards. The problem is that methane is not only leaky and problematic in that way, but it is also very cheap. And the reason it's cheap is because it's obtained by hydrofracking. You have seen that discussed in previous talks today. It is a controversial matter. If you want to shape an opinion of your own on hydrofracking, read the Deutsch report, a report chaired by the former provost at MIT, a chemist, includes at least one Stanford faculty member and includes Fred Krupp, the head of the Environmental Defense Fund. That was supposed to be a serious and thoughtful report that resolved the problem that hydrofracking is okay as long as it's properly regulated. Problem is it's regulated by states. And unless you're a powerful proponent of states' rights, that's probably going to, around for a while. And the question is, why is it not at somebody's behest included ultimately in the portfolio of federal regulations? It is not federally regulated. And the question is, are there people who do this very well, and are there people who do it not so well? We're still waiting for the movie called Meet the Frackers that describes the career of a fracker who is a little bit careless and leaks quite a lot of methane. Now, the question is there a serious effort to get a handle on fugitive methane? Because it can come in a variety of places. It comes from livestock, it comes from wetlands, it comes from odd places that you wouldn't expect. There's a lot of anaerobic digestive activity going on the bottom of lakes, particularly northern lakes in the American Midwest, where people like to go ice fishing in the winter. And I have news for you that on occasion, the ice fisherman cutting a hole to drop his line in and catch a nice trout carelessly strikes a match and lights the ammunitions on fire. You really can burn that stuff. And so people up there tend to take it kind of seriously. I was going to turn from methane and from the whole question of monitoring events and what has been done with respect to fugitive methane around the country. But I think the best estimates are now that it's probably somewhat higher than EPA has estimated it to be, but we're waiting for more news, and there are good people at NCAR, now UCAR, that are doing that from aircraft as we speak. Finally, I want to turn back to coal and talk about exporting coal, because there is a serious proposal now underway. American coal companies have let forward contracts with China to dig coal from the Powder River Basin in Wyoming and export it to China. Some people are horrified by that prospect. Let me give you a few data points. Some of the horror is local. Nobody likes long coal trains going across the American West on Burlington Northern's monopoly. Nobody likes the conversion of Longview, Washington into a port to receive the coal and ship it to China. There's an argument that because we've gotten rid of all the power plants that are fired by coal in the Northwest, in Oregon and Washington, that we shouldn't be doing such a dreadful thing. On the other hand, there's something interesting that is often forgotten. And how many of you remember acid rain? I'm so glad some people remember acid rain. Powder River played an important role in acid rain. The hope after the 1990 Clean Air Act amendments was that you would get a situation in which people would put in wet limestone scrubbers and they would clean up their sulfur dioxide emissions, and we would get no more acid rain, and the Canadians wouldn't complain about what we're doing in the Midwest anymore, and even the Office of Management and Budget in the Bush administration thought that, the first Bush administration, excuse me, thought that it was a good idea to install a cap and trade regulatory program for sulfur dioxide. The only problem is that Powder River Basin coal was so free of sulfur that it could be mined relatively cheaply by the same railroads that would probably now be taking it up to the Northwest for China, and truck it east and sell it for very much less than West Virginia anthracite was selling in its own bailiwick. The result was that everybody went to Powder River coal, and Burlington Northern and Warren Buffett and everybody who benefited from the deal took the rents. So if you were Prime Minister for Public Health in China, you might be scratching your head about Powder River coal. You might say, boy, that would be a pretty good deal. We've had an acid rain problem or two, and the Japanese have complained to us about acid rain when it goes up there, and we could get out of that. Furthermore, coal is kind of dirty, and it's a public health hazard. And if we went to Powder River coal like they did in the U.S., it would really make our citizens a lot more comfortable. Not of course, that China has always been deeply concerned with the public health comfort of its citizens. Never mind, it would look like a reasonably good deal if that happened. Everybody else says that they've been getting signals about talking time. How am I doing? What? Those were 4 fingers. Oh, that's 7 fingers. Let me ask for a question. Let me ask John Wyant for a question.
I have one quick question. From the point of view of your group, in our wonderful political situation now, there's this Jeff Bingham and Steve Chu clean energy standard, which gives full credit for nuclear and half credit for gas. From your point of view, is that a good idea or a Faustian bargain?
I don't think it's Faustian, but I am not as passionately anti-nuclear as many people are. I had my mind bent a little bit by Fukushima, but that's one that I would want to look at more carefully. Question back there?
Yeah, on the nuclear topic. So earlier today, Japan just announced that it's going to cut its nuclear program by 2040. So what do you think that's...
How far?
What's that?
How far are they going to cut it?
All the way.
All the way.
And so they're the third largest importer of crude oil and third largest importer of coal. What do you think that does to the nuclear market, one, and I mean, this kind of what we're here to talk about in general?
Well, the Powder River boys who are talking about shipping Powder River coal to Asia will have noticed that on this same day that you report this news from Japan, that a major Japan shipbuilder has announced a program to build large numbers of vessels to transport coal from the United States to Asia. We'll see whether that works out. But it conclusively demonstrates that once you twist a dial in this system in one place, lots of other things are likely to follow. Somebody else must. Yeah, please.
I'd just like to hear your thoughts on unconventional oil and oil in general. It seems to be the one you didn't talk about too much.
It did, but I didn't give myself time, and so I'm thrilled that you asked the question. Extreme oil, unconventional oil gotten from the depths of the ocean, bitumen, tar sands, all the extreme oils have a really high cost hurdle for the extractors to use. So if you look at the relationship between oil demand and price in 24, that was just about the end of sweet Arabian crude. And at about that time, there was an interesting secular switch at which there was suddenly a very steep curve that related demand to price. And that's been true all along until the present. And so it represents both a challenge and an opportunity. The opportunity is to use that very steep curve relating demand and price so that if you produced an oil substitute, suppose we produced a marvelous biofuel that really worked. Parenthetically, a biofuel that didn't really work, at least in my view in some respects, namely ethanol from corn, actually had the effect probably of taking about $10 a barrel off the price of oil. Because if you substitute for oil with electric cars, or if you substitute with building efficiency, if you substitute with an excellent biofuel, maybe we're praying for algae, then you can really impact the price of oil and drop it by significant amounts. I mean, I think that a change in demand of a dozen or so barrels per day or something will reduce the price by something like $15 something. So I'm not really sure of those numbers, but there's a paper shortly to come out that will lay them out, and I think they're about right. The cost hurdles for extracting extreme oil make it very difficult for anybody who is in that business to start controlling the market. Don't make me give up. I've had a terrific time with this, and I think you've probably had a terrific day yourselves, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity to be here, and thank you very much.